Hey everybody, Mike Gillette, live from my living room. And I've been contemplating an important lesson I learned a number of years back, a lesson on sort of the paradoxical nature of the pursuit of excellence. It was a night that a question was answered for me, and I want to share that with you. So many years ago, I was a police officer, and I was a particular police officer who pushed himself very hard, who had high expectations for himself, and always was looking for new and better ways of doing things. And the challenge I experienced was, the harder I pushed and the more I wanted to get done, the more I seemed to kind of push up against things, boundaries, the envelope that we sometimes speak of. And I would occasionally run afoul of my supervisors, my bosses. And I didn't understand this. Now, granted, I was young and I was very busy being Mike Gillette and doing Mike Gillette kinds of things. So I wasn't prone to sort of step back and kind of seek some objective clarity or perspective. I was just very much, pushing straight ahead, doing what I did. And I just never really understood or came to any real clear resolution as to how is it that somebody who's trying to do the best job possible might not be widely accepted or well regarded for doing so. So that was just something that I kind of carried with me, not really understanding it, but I continued unfazed to do those things. A couple of years go by, and this was a period of my life when I was very much enamored with the martial arts. And I had, in the limited sphere in which I lived, I was in the Midwest in a small town. I worked at a small agency. The police agency itself was not remarkable. The community I lived in was not remarkable. So there wasn't a lot of remarkable opportunities with respect to the martial arts. So to uh, pursue the types of goals I had set for myself, I had to do a lot of traveling. I traveled far from home to seek out people who I had learned of in the martial arts magazines or had written books and that kind of thing. So I had, in 1997, found someone who I pursued, and in addition to his extensive martial arts background, he was a recently retired police officer. And like me, he had spent some time in the military. So we had some commonality to our background, and I felt as though this is one of the reasons why we seem to have pretty good rapport. And he just seemed like a good fit for me personality wise. So I would travel to where he lived in the Dallas area and study privately with him. And then when he would do his touring seminars, if he was anywhere close to where I would travel to those places for additional training. So one particular November in 1997, he was in Kalamazoo, Michigan. So I traveled to Kalamazoo, Michigan. And the night before the weekend event was to kick off, I was there, he was there, a couple of other attendees were also there. And we find ourselves in the hotel restaurant, just having coffee and just sort of listening to this guy spin tales. He was a gifted storyteller and had been compiling a lot of interesting experiences for many years. And at one point, I had an important realization. And this was a realization coming from a guy who, in my mind, was a much more super advanced version of me. He had done law enforcement much longer. He had made bigger arrests than I had. He had written books. He was in magazine articles. He had traveled the world being a martial arts expert. And I aspired to be like this person. And he's telling a particular story. And the story itself was not remarkable, but a key detail for me was remarkable, and that was simply this. He relayed a circumstance where he had kind of run afoul of his own command staff, his supervisors, because he was somebody who was prone to pushing boundaries. He was kind of redefining what it meant to be a police officer at the agency that he worked. This hit me like a ton of bricks. How could anyone who supervised what in my mind was just obviously a superior breed of super cop, how could that ever be a problem? And yet here it was. He was relating how he had run up against the same types of barriers than I had, than I was, currently in that phase of my life. And at the time, it probably should have been much more obvious to me that, yeah, not everybody's going to be comfortable with someone who's perpetually trying to, remark the lines, redefine boundaries. But I was so busy doing that that I never really stepped back to look at how others might regard that, if that makes sense. So in that moment, even though it was a bit perplexing to me because this guy was so gifted and so advanced and so all these things I so wanted to be in those days, I was still a bit confounded why he was not always well received in his efforts, but it started to sink in. And of course, as the years go by, I have more experiences like this, and it becomes more and more obvious in retrospect. I meet more people who had similar experiences, and I talk with numerous people online who have shared numerous experiences, and it all seems very clear to me now. But for me, the important lesson was this, and this is what I would like to leave you with, is that the pursuit of excellence is a polarizing thing. It just drives some people crazy. That is not a sign to stop doing. Or when you push the boundaries and the boundaries inevitably push back on you, that is not a sign to stop pushing. Keep pushing. You're probably on the right track. Do what you need to do the best you can, to be the best you can. You're on the right track.